Please, sir. I don't have money, but I promise I'll pay when I grow up. Those words rang out louder than any boardroom pitch Richard Langston had ever heard. And he'd heard plenty. After all, he was one of the country's most powerful real estate billionaires. But this wasn't a negotiation room. It was a cramped grocery store on the edge of the city, where harsh fluorescent lights flickered above chipped tiles and stale bread. It was supposed to be a normal day. Richard had just come from a high-stakes meeting where he sealed a $50 million luxury development deal. Dressed in his tailored charcoal gray suit, with Italian leather shoes clicking across the floor, he was only there because his assistant had forgotten to buy almond milk for his protein shake. He was reaching for a cold bottle when a child's voice caught his ear. He turned slightly. There, at the front of the line, stood a little black girl, maybe 7 years old, wearing a worn purple hoodie, a skirt too big for her tiny frame, and mismatched socks. Her braids were messy, her face smudged with dirt, but her eyes? Her eyes burned with something fierce, determination. In her hands, she clutched a single carton of milk like it was gold. Kid. The cashier sighed, clearly tired of the scene. I already told you. No money, no milk. But it's for my brother. He's just a baby. My mama's really sick. I'll pay later, I promise. I'll grow up and give it back. I promise. The girl's voice was soft but strong. She wasn't whining or pleading, just stating a fact. Like a deal. Like her word was enough. Richard froze. He'd sat across from CEOs who bluffed with fake numbers, watched grown men cry in court over broken contracts. But this little girl, her promise felt realer than any of them. Look, the cashier groaned, reaching for the milk. You can't just. I'll cover it, Richard said suddenly, stepping forward. The cashier blinked. Excuse me. I said, I'll buy the milk. The girl turned slowly. Her eyes widened, locking with his. She didn't smile or leap with joy. She just studied him, like she was making sure he could be trusted. I don't want a handout, she said. I just need time. Richard knelt to her level. What's your name? Lena. Well, Lena, he said softly, handing the milk back to her. I believe you. Take care of your brother. Lena clutched the milk tight and nodded. Thank you. I won't forget this. And just like that, she turned and ran, barefoot, out of the store and into the gray city streets. Behind him, someone muttered, "What a weird kid." But Richard didn't move. He stared at the sliding doors where she'd disappeared, a strange ache in his chest. He had all the money in the world, but in that moment, it felt like she was the one who had something he'd lost. Richard Langston had closed billion-dollar mergers. He'd stood on the covers of Forbes and Bloomberg, been called a financial genius, and even dined with presidents. But he had never seen someone like Lena, someone who, with nothing in her hands but a carton of milk, held more dignity than most people he'd ever met in his life. As he stepped into the back seat of his black Escalade, his driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror. No milk, sir. Richard didn't answer right away. He looked out the window instead, watching the rain drizzle against the glass. I bought something else, he finally muttered. That night, back in his penthouse overlooking the skyline, he couldn't sleep. The city sparkled beneath him like a giant diamond, yet his mind kept circling back to that girl in the hoodie. Lena, her face, her voice. I promise I'll pay when I grow up. Those words haunted him, not in a sad way, but in a way that unsettled something buried inside. He tried to distract himself with work. He pulled up spreadsheets, emailed 2 CFOs, looked over a new zoning proposal for a beachfront hotel. Nothing worked. So he got up, padded barefoot to the kitchen, poured himself a scotch, and made a decision. By 7 a.m., he was back at the same grocery store. The cashier looked up, confused. You again? Do you know that girl from yesterday? Richard asked. The cashier shrugged. She comes in sometimes. Always tries to get stuff without paying. I usually kick her out. She wasn't stealing, Richard replied sharply. She made a promise. The woman rolled her eyes. Look, she's just some homeless kid. Half of them are. Richard turned to leave, frustrated. But he wasn't giving up. Back in his office, he called his assistant. Her name is Lena. About 7 years old. Black. Wears a purple hoodie. I want someone to find her. His assistant paused. Sir, this sounds like it could get messy. A random girl from the street. I don't want a PR stunt. No cameras. No posts. Just find her. The assistant hesitated. May I ask why? Richard stared at a photo on his desk. one he rarely looked at anymore. It was of him at age 10, holding a bowl of soup at a food pantry with his mother. She died not long after. Cancer. He hadn't thought about those days in years. Because I remember what it feels like to have nothing, he whispered. And because I think she might become something. By day's end, a lead came in. A shelter on South Side. A single mom. 2 kids. No income. No insurance. Evicted 6 weeks ago. The girl fit the description. Richard didn't send a driver this time. He went himself. This wasn't business. This wasn't about ROI. This was personal. He needed to see the girl who still believed that a promise, her word, was enough. And this time, he wasn't leaving without changing her life. The Southside shelter didn't look like much: peeling paint, sagging steps, and a broken window patched with cardboard. But Richard Langston had once lived in worse. Long before the private jets and glass towers, he and his mother had bounced between places like this. And now, standing on that cracked concrete porch, something about it felt familiar. He knocked. The door creaked open. A weary woman in her 30s appeared. She looked exhausted, with hollow cheeks, tired eyes, and a faded robe hanging off her thin frame. But behind her, clutching a small child, stood Lena. Her eyes widened as they met his. "You," she whispered, stunned. "You came." Richard knelt slightly, so he was at her level. "Told you I believed you." Lena didn't speak. She didn't run. She just stared, like her young brain couldn't make sense of the fact that the man from the grocery store, the man in the fancy suit, was now standing in her world. Her mother stepped in, cautious. "Can I help you?" Richard nodded gently. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just wanted to check in." Lena left an impression on me. The woman looked unsure, protective. But Lena turned and whispered something into her mother's ear. A pause. Then, the mother stepped aside. "Come in," she said quietly. Inside was dim and cramped. 3 mattresses on the floor, 1 flickering light bulb, a space heater buzzing loudly. The smell of baby formula lingered in the air. There were no toys. No pictures on the wall. Just survival. Lena sat cross-legged on a blanket beside her baby brother, cradling him in her arms. "He's better now? I warmed the milk you got." Richard's chest tightened. "And you came back to pay me, right?" she asked, reaching into a dusty shoebox. She pulled out 3 quarters, a nickel, and 2 buttons. He didn't laugh. He didn't correct her. Instead, he sat beside her and said, "You kept your promise. That's more than most people do." Her mother, watching from the kitchen area, spoke softly. "We didn't mean to put anyone out. I was working before I got sick. A cleaning job. But I got laid off. Then the hospital bills came. And now we're here." Richard nodded, listening. Truly listening. "Would you take a job again if you could?" She looked at him, confused. "Yes, absolutely. But I don't have transportation. No ID anymore. No one hires someone like me." Richard reached into his coat and handed her a white envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "A second chance." Inside was a prepaid phone, temporary housing details, and an invitation to interview at one of his companies for a staff coordinator role with childcare support included. Her hand trembled. "And Lena?" he said, turning to the girl. "This is for you." He handed her a second envelope. Inside, full scholarship enrollment forms for a top private elementary school, with uniforms, transportation, and meals covered. Lena looked up, stunned. "Why would you do this?" He smiled softly. "Because your promise was worth more than money. And I believe in people who don't forget their word." 3 weeks later, Lena stood on the front steps of a pristine white school building, backpack hugging her shoulders and her braids neatly tied with purple ribbons. She didn't look like the barefoot girl from the grocery store anymore. She looked like someone stepping into a future. But her grip on that backpack strap told another story. She was nervous. Inside the school, everything was new. The floors gleamed. Teachers smiled. Other kids wore shiny shoes and clean uniforms. Lena had never seen so many books in one place. And though the uniform on her back was crisp and tailored, she still felt like someone who didn't belong. Until she saw him. Richard Langston stood near the office, quietly speaking with the school principal. When he saw her, his expression softened. "You made it," he said. Lena nodded. "You said you believed in me." "I still do." She hesitated, then whispered, "I didn't break my promise." Richard raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" She reached into her backpack and pulled out something carefully folded, a small envelope. Inside it, $2.35 in crumpled bills and coins. My mama got a little money from her new job, she explained. And I saved some from helping Miss Dottie clean the shelter steps. It's not much, but it's for the milk. Richard was silent for a long moment. The principal looked puzzled, unsure what was happening. He knelt to Lena's level and placed a hand gently over the envelope. Lena, this means more to me than any check I've ever received. Even more than $1 million? She asked. Way more, he said, smiling. Because $1 million can come and go. But your word? That's priceless. Later that week, Lena's mother started her new job at Langston Properties, helping coordinate operations at one of their city buildings. Richard had arranged for her to have on-site childcare, transportation, and health benefits. As for Lena, school opened her up like a flower. She was brilliant, curious, kind. Her teachers quickly noticed she had a gift for numbers, especially patterns and logic. Math became her language, her way of expressing the world. By the end of her first year, she was tutoring other students. One day, after school, Richard visited her home. No longer the shelter, but a cozy apartment with curtains on the windows and art on the fridge. Lena sat at the kitchen table, teaching her little brother how to read using cereal boxes. Mr. Langston, she asked suddenly, do you think I'll ever be rich like you? He thought for a moment. You already are, he said. You just haven't cashed in yet. And in her eyes, those same wide, honest eyes from the grocery store, something sparkled, not just hope, but purpose. Because she had kept her promise. And in doing so, she reminded a billionaire of the value. 10 years passed. And just like that, the barefoot girl with a carton of milk in her hand was now standing in front of hundreds, on stage, at a prestigious scholarship banquet hosted by the Langston Foundation. Her name was Lena Monroe now. Not just a name known in her city, but far beyond. National math competitions, full-ride scholarships, early college admission, she'd done it all. At just 17, Lena had already been offered positions at Ivy League schools. But tonight, she wasn't here for herself. She was here to speak, to tell the story that had changed everything. She stepped to the podium in a sleek maroon dress, her braids now long, her posture straight, her voice clear. When I was 7, she began, I walked into a grocery store with a promise and no money. My baby brother was hungry. My mom was sick. And all I wanted was a carton of milk. The crowd fell silent. I told the man at the counter I'd pay later. And someone behind me heard me say that. Someone who didn't laugh. Someone who didn't look away. Instead, he believed me. She paused, smiling gently. That man was Richard Langston. The crowd shifted, and camera lights flashed toward the front row. Richard sat quietly in his chair, a little older now, silver in his beard, but with eyes as sharp as ever. He didn't just buy the milk, Lena continued. He bought me time. He bought me dignity. And then he gave me a chance, without expecting anything in return. He saw a kid that the world ignored and said, your promise matters. Applause echoed softly around the ballroom. But here's the thing, she said, her voice warming. What he really did was teach me how to believe in myself. And because he did, I could help my mother get well, help my brother grow strong, and help myself rise higher than I ever dreamed. From her pocket, she pulled out something small and worn, a creased envelope. This, she said, holding it up, is the same envelope I gave him years ago, with $2.35. I made good on my promise. But what I realized later is that the real debt I owe him isn't about money. It's about legacy. She turned toward him, voice trembling. So today, Mr. Langston, I'd like to return this to you. And in return, I'm starting something new. From behind the podium, she revealed a framed document, a foundation in her name, Milk and Promise, dedicated to providing emergency meals and education grants to children living in shelters. Because no kid, she said, should have to trade their childhood just to feed their family. The audience erupted in applause. Standing ovation. Even Richard stood, tears in his eyes, his hands clapping proudly. Later that night, as Lena walked off stage, Richard embraced her. You didn't just keep your promise, he whispered. You became someone others can now believe in. And she smiled, replying with the same words that started it all. I promised, didn't I?